reasons. You say on paper you get the same amount from tax hikes as you do from spending, but it's the second round impacts. We talked a bit about competitiveness. We need to get our cost base down in this economy. And the other problem is that if you raise taxes, you create some problems for the economy. Firstly, employees may look at compensating for those tax rises through wage hikes. We can't afford that. The second thing is you look at the attracting talent to this country. It's going to be much more difficult. Ireland is perceived as a low tax economy. It's been one of the planks we've built our economy on over the last 10 to 15 years. And then, I think thirdly, you look at our current labour force base. Will people just decide to up and leave? We can't afford to lose our talent. So for all those reasons, I think we've got the mix wrong so far.
Jerry, your organisation has been talking about taxation in the specific context of pension funds, and maybe whinging a little bit about changes that might be being mooted.
So it's more warning than whinging. I think, yes, there are a number of areas that worry me about the kind of focus of the government in particular. Obviously, it's very important to get the mixed right balance between taxation and public spending. I don't think we can't stop spending, we shouldn't stop spending, but at the same time, we can't keep borrowing effectively to pay salaries, which is more or less what we're doing at the moment. So we need to look at the bigger picture. And there is a danger that, particularly in the area of pensions, as one example, it's a very long-term issue. And there's a danger that in the current environment we park the long-term issue and we just deal with the short-term. And there's certainly we've spent 20 years within pensions trying to work out how to deal with the pensions crisis that's looming in terms of the ageing population and the so-called pensions time bomb. Now we seem to be focused on how we stop spending $3 billion a year on tax relief, which is completely counterproductive to what we should be doing. And I do worry about that. We do have, at last count, 800,000 employees saving for retirement in this country, and it's not the time to discourage them from doing that. We also
Why not make it compulsory?
I think I want to find the right way to get everybody to have adequate provision in retirement. I don't think there's enough analysis on the people who don't currently have pension provision to work out whether they actually need it or not. The worry about compulsory systems is compulsory systems around the world tend to be based on low contribution levels. And what happens is that you end up with a levelling down, and the low contribution level becomes the norm. But because you've got a compulsory system that the state has put in place, people think that they have adequate cover because the state has put that there for them. So that is the danger with compulsion. And I'm not sure at the moment this is the right time for compulsory pensions anyway, because I think people just have suffered so much in terms of their take-home pay. Getting hit again may not be the right time. But we do need to think about things like that. And just another example, at the same time where the Pensions Board as pensions regulator is looking at ways of allowing trustees of defined benefit schemes more flexibility in dealing with pension deficits, the Department of Finance has imposed a 1% levy on life insurance products, which includes annuities, which pushes up the liability of defined benefit schemes by 1%. And, that lack of joined-up thinking clearly is unhelpful at the moment.
Charlie, what's your view on the broader topic of public spending and taxation?
Well, it wouldn't be much different to what Rossa has already said, is ultimately there should have been less cuts on the capital spending side, because at the end of the day is capital spending, in terms of continuing with it adds to the country's productive potential and therefore can raise long-term economic growth. Current spending should have been cut by more. On the tax front, there are areas in terms of child benefits, etc., taxes on second homes, on the Irish version of McMansion in America, etc. But Rossa pretty much captured what I was saying with my views.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that this debate, we don't hear it in the US and the UK as much. I think because they've taken the decision that they want to reflate their economy through every means possible, and obviously if that's mortgaging the future of whatever way they believe the economies are going to play out, the gamble is that they spend as much as they can now, so you create consumer spending going forward that helps pay down these taxes that you're going to eventually have to levy. So we're in a different mix to a certain extent, and probably because we're bound into the EU rule structures of how we should control our debt to GDP levels, and obviously the cost of bailing out our banking system. But on the other side of that, and even further from the nationalisation theme, I think that we probably look at what assets we do have to sell within the government context. So beyond taxation and public spending, There is probably about 8 to 10 billion of assets that the Irish government holds. So probably at this stage we're right up against the wall, and we maybe should look at selling them.
Before I call Marco in, Rossi, you said something that you'd like to hear Marco's view on.
Yeah,
I forget what it is now.
Marco is an eminent bond investor, so I was wondering, would he be willing to pay for capital spending if it is to boost our future productivity and our tax revenue trend should give us a higher trend of tax revenue into the future?
I'm afraid that's not our mandate. We're hired to invest in government bonds, and
I mean, pay for our government, invest in our government bonds. We can use that to invest in infrastructure. That's what I meant.
This is because of Marco's concern. You're addressing it to him because of his concern about the state of.
Yeah, well, I mean, the government cut back on capital spending because they thought we couldn't borrow the money.
it's effectively what the EU is doing already, or has been done over the last 10, 15 years. They've been investing with the Irish government in infrastructure, and every other citizen of the EU has been contributing to the EU for funding Irish roads and other infrastructure projects. So that will probably continue, but I think the appetite is low amongst the likes of ourselves at this point in time. But on the issue, the question that was raised initially, I think it makes sense to have a quick reality check and put some numbers on the issue. The budget deficit for the first 5 months of 2009 were reported to be 10.6 billion euros. GDP is about 200 billion euros, at least for 2008. It's certainly going to be a bit lower this year. If you annualize the same budget deficit, you get to somewhere around 25 billion. So on a 200 million GDP, we're going to have at least 25 billion. Unemployment is currently 11.8%. At the end of May, if I understand it, and people on the live register. That's going to go perhaps to 70% as the ERSI has predicted. I.e., the budget deficit is only going to get worse. And I fear that the government, for all the puha, and the latest budget steps that they've taken, don't have the will or the power to take the tough decisions that need to be made now. And you can only tax so much. We know that roughly 20% of people pay 80% of income tax in Ireland. It's the most progressive and most skewed tax system in the whole of the EU, pretty much. It's unsustainable. What do they want? They want 10% of people pay 90% of taxes. I'm seriously worried that the government does not get a hold of this problem very soon. And the only solution eventually is that they're going to be out of power, a new party is going to come in, they're inheriting the problem, as already alluded to, and what you then have is that very severe cuts will have to be made. And take, for example, one thing that I would be in favour of, it would be some sort of voucher scheme that people on welfare could get for, say, a 20% cut in their welfare benefit. They'd get a voucher, they can go to the local Superquinn or the local Irish supermarket where they get Irish produce, vegetables at cost price effectively, helping there with the Irish economy and Irish producers. Anything really to avoid the ultimate scenario of doomsday, which is soup kitchens on O'Connell Street. And I really hope we don't go there.
David, were your views reflected at the table?
Well, I think the last thought was probably a bit scarier than anything I'd come up with. But no, I just had a thought that, to be honest, before any of this happened, I thought that I would have been concerned that the public finances were in trouble. In the long run, there are sort of pension deficits building up in the public service. Somebody mentioned a figure earlier on about deficits or differences between the rates of pay in the public service and the private sector. I think in some ways very encouraging to see that the private sector is making the adjustments, which, I know when I was doing economics, the textbooks always said that was the sort of thing that didn't really ever happen, at least not in Europe. The States, it sort of happened. That was why the States was sort of a much more dynamic economy. The private sector wages would generally adjust downwards when they needed to. So the fact that that's happening in Ireland is probably a good thing, but it doesn't seem to be happening on the public sector side at all. And I think we probably had problems even before this happened. So and I'd be quite concerned, and I think